Hello, 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. Good evening, everybody. Welcome back on this Wednesday. It is the Wednesday before Christmas, isn't it? We will not have Elba or anything else for that matter on this coming Wednesday. One Wednesday off, and we'll be back in 2 weeks. So we will have church on this Sunday, Christmas Eve. No church on Wednesday of next week. Church on Sunday, the New Year's Eve, and then Wednesday night, again, the first Wednesday of the new year. So the only Sunday or Wednesday off is next Wednesday, all right? Gave you guys a few minutes to have some discussion. Some took advantage more than others, but we formed some new groups here, so that's cool. We'll have a chance to talk a little bit more as we go. I think everyone is knowledgeable about what we're doing here with Elba, so we'll just jump right into it. Father, help us, guide us, show us things. Thank you for increasing our love of your word, and thank you for the community that we build also in these times. In Jesus' name, amen. Questions for investigations, chapters 5 through 26, the largest set of readings that we've had all year is the last set of readings for the year, but you'll find that we will actually zoom through this fairly quickly. Here we go. Question number 1, differences in detail between Deuteronomy and accounts in the previous 3 books of the Bible may primarily be attributed to A, biblical errors. I mean, come on, we have to expect them because these things were written by people thousands of years ago. B, God changing his mind about the details. C, Moses speaking extemporaneously in sermon-like fashion. Or D, the fact that the Israelites finally passed their tests. I thought that we might have a few laughs on that, but anyway. 14 people have responded. I will give 7.2 seconds to continue working on that. All right. We didn't see what the responses were. Let's take a look at the responses. Most people said Moses, speaking extemporaneously in sermon-like fashion. 1 or 2 people think it's due to biblical errors or God changing his mind. We will find out very soon. Number 2, the Hebrew word for hear, as in the thing you do with your ear. Colby, what's up?
Hey, Dr. G.
I'm good. The Hebrew word for hear is what? A, B, C, D, abad, B, shema, C, tehillah, and D, I can't actually read it. What does it say? Oh, yeah, coal. Coal. And Lindsay said, there's no way that coal is the word for hear. Which one is the Hebrew word for hear? There is a point to this question. It's actually kind of important. I wouldn't just randomly ask you to know Hebrew words, generally speaking, but it's kind of important. So, all right, let's see what we got here. Mixed bag. Nobody thought it was coal, but fairly mixed bag here on the other 3 responses. Okay, all of the following are commands given in Deuteronomy 6:7, chapter 6, verse 7, regarding God's law, except. So all of these are what God commands about it, except which one? A, teach them diligently to your children. B, talk of them when you sit in your house and walk by the way. C, talk of them when you lie down and when you rise up. Or D, share them with foreigners and strangers. So which one is not what God wants you to do with his law if you're a Jewish person in the Moses time frame? It won't accept it? Was your answer E? I don't know. The good news is no one will know if you got it right or wrong. But let's see here. We got 17 people. By far, most are saying share them with foreigners and strangers is the correct response, meaning it's not what the Bible tells them to do. And so we'll get to that also in just a minute. Last question, true or false? Most of Deuteronomy 5 through 26 is a rearticulation of laws given earlier in the Torah. True or false? Most of Deuteronomy 5 through 26 is a rearticulation of laws given earlier in the Torah. Most people are saying true. Okay. Topic for tonight, we talked about it last week, that Deuteronomy is essentially 3 speeches or sermons, if you will, by Moses on the east bank of the Jordan River before they're getting ready to cross, right before Moses is about to die. And he's telling these people, these Israelites, here's what I want you to remember about all that has happened before. Keep these things in the front of your mind, and that will be a very important part of today's talk, is keep it in front of you. Literally. Bind it to your forehead, literally is what it says. So this is the second sermon of the 3 sermons. And so Moses' second sermon is the topic. And again, I am going to zoom through here, chapters 5 through 26. You read it or you didn't. And it is a rearticulation, to answer one of the questions. It is primarily a rearticulation of laws that were given earlier in the Torah, whether in Exodus or Leviticus or Numbers. And we talked about how the word Deuteronomy means second law, and so this is a rearticulation of what has come before. We also, before we get into these kind of nuts and bolts through the chapters, we also talked about the structure of the treaty last week. So 3 parts to this treaty between God, between the suzerain and the under people. And in this case, God is playing the part of the suzerain. So the 3 parts of this treaty are, first part is the history of the relationship. In other words, here's what I, God, have done for you. Second part is the terms of the agreement, the terms of the covenant. In other words, the law. And then the third part is the consequences, good or bad. If you keep up your end of the covenant, here's what you can expect good from me. And if you do not keep up your end of the covenant, here's what you can expect bad from me. We call these blessings and cursings all through the book of Deuteronomy, specifically chapter 28, but there's other places where there's reference to, if you do this, things will go well. If you don't do it, things will not go well. And so just remember that as we go into this, because we'll see parts of this. I also mentioned last week, sort of like little Russian nesting dolls, each of the 3 sermons is one of those 3 parts, but even within that part, all 3 parts can be found. In other words, last week we talked mostly about the history of the relationship. Here's what God has done for them. This week we're talking mostly about the laws. In other words, the rearticulation of laws that were already passed down before. It's primarily the terms section. Here are the terms of this covenant. And then next week we'll talk the main feature will be the blessings and cursings. Here's what to expect if you do, and here's what to expect if you don't. That's the main feature. But even within this week, again, mostly about the law and terms of the covenant, but even within this middle section, this second sermon, we see elements of the history of the relationship. Here's what God has done for you. We also see elements of blessing and curses. So all of that is in there here as we get started going through these chapters 5 through 26. So a very, again, quick bullet point summary of these things. Chapter 5 is where the second sermon begins. Moses begins on that second day, second articulation to the people. Again, he's not talking to all 2 million people at once. He's talking to representatives who are then going to go pass this word on. to the rest of the people. But on this second sermon, he begins with the Ten Commandments, re-articulating these things. There are subtle differences between his Deuteronomy chapter 5 and Exodus chapter 20 are parallel, right? The Exodus chapter 20 is the first articulation of the Ten Commandments. Deuteronomy chapter 5 is the second articulation. There are subtle differences between the two sets of Ten Commandments, as there are subtle differences in other things that Moses is saying to the people. About things that happened 40 years ago, remember. Okay, what do we attribute these differences to? Okay, did Moses forget what he said the first time? Has God changed his mind? Is he casting these laws in a different shade? No, none of that. It has nothing to do with anything other than Moses is delivering a sermon. He's giving it extemporaneously. He is speaking to the people and saying, here's what we did 40 years ago. Here are the laws from 40 years ago. And so there's a little bit of some wording here and there that's different. We don't take that to mean that there's some mistakes in the Bible. Okay? Has nothing to do with that. All right. Notice chapter 5 also, at the end of chapter 5, there is a little bit of history of the relationship between God and the people. And there's also, at the very end of the chapter, there is a piece about them. Here's what it will go well with you if you keep up your end, and it won't go well with you if you don't. In other words, chapter 5 is a microcosm all within itself of the law part, the history part, and the blessings and curses part. Okay, all of that is there right in chapter 5. Chapter 6 is the Shema. Whether or not you've heard that term before is a very important term in Jewish living. The Shema is the Hebrew word for hear. We're talking about the command that we know from the New Testament, the greatest commandment, a couple different places in the Gospels, right? So this comes from Deuteronomy chapter 6, beginning at verse 4. And that command, the first word of that command is hear, O Israel. And that word in Hebrew is Shema. So the Jewish people refer to this as the Shema. This whole bit is, here's what we are hearing that then we're going to go do. All right? And so what is it that they do? And unfortunately, I left my Bible. So can I get one of you guys to read Deuteronomy chapter 6, verses 4 through 9? Keep going. Okay, hold on right there. So, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Okay, now, what are we going to do with this? We're going to make sure this is right in front of your face all the time. So, start that verse one more time. Teach them diligently to your children. Talk of them when you sit in your house. When you walk by the way. When you lie down. And when you rise up. What does that sound like to you? All the time. All the time. Keep this in front of you all the time. Keep this in front of you all the time. How quickly do we forget things? Very quickly, right? Keep it in front of you all the time. Now, we'll come back to this a little bit later. This would be in our application. But what they were doing with the law, with the Torah, the first 5 books, keep it in front of you. We are to be doing with our version of God's religion, if I can say it that way. With the entirety of God's Word, Old Testament and New Testament, and just Him in general. Keeping Him, keeping Jesus, keeping God in front of our eyes and in front of our thoughts. That doesn't go away in the New Covenant. To hear, O Israel, The Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength, and keep it all in front of you at all times. That's a good word. That is something we should continue to do. By the way, the phrase there, the Lord our God, the Lord is one, is not the best translation in the world. It's not referring to him being one, like being one entity, although he is. You know, we talk about Trinity. We talk about God being three in one, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, three in one. That's not what that word is referring to. It's not really referring to his oneness, although he is one. That is really referring to him being the one and only. In other words, all these gods out there that these other people serve, your God, the Lord, L-O-R-D capital, in other words, Yahweh, Hear, O Israel, Yahweh, our God is the one and only, the one who is above all others. Okay, chapter 7. The message there is when you come into the new land, to the promised land, destroy everybody. If you do this, I will bless you. Chapter 8, don't forget God when things get comfortable. They're going to come into this land and they're going to begin to get comfortable because it's a good land with a lot of good stuff. And so he will provide for them good things, and you get comfortable with that. And the theme of chapter 8 is don't forget God when things get comfortable. That for sure can be an American theme, can it not? All right, chapter 9, God is not giving you this land because of your own righteousness. It is because he has said this is what he wants to do. Make no mistake, you Israelites, you are not good. Your parents' generation just proved that, right? And so chapter 9 is all about chapter 9 is all about God giving you this land because this is what he wants to do, and this is what he said he would do. It's not about you being good. Chapter 10 is the tablets 2.0. Moses breaks the tablets, so he goes back up and gets another set, right? And so he's telling this story. Again, this is the history. This is what God has done for us. It's more about the history of what happened in the past here. Chapter 11 is a chapter that really mostly deals with blessings and curses. Similar to what we'll see in chapter 28, which is kind of the ultimate chapter of blessings and curses that we'll see next week. But a similar deal in chapter 11. Chapter 11, verse 26 says, "Look, I have set before you a blessing and a curse." What does that sound like? Deuteronomy chapter 30, which we haven't gotten there yet, but you all know the passage where Moses says, the Lord is setting before you a blessing and a curse. You got a choice here. The choice is between blessing and cursing, life and death. Choose life. And so we'll get to that next week, but this is almost verbatim the same language here in chapter 11. Chapter 12, worship God's way, not the world's way. So we're not going to go out and do all the crazy things that the world does. We're going to do it the Lord's way. When we do animal sacrifices, we're going to do it the Lord's way. We're going to bring them to the right place. They're going to be the right kind of animal. We're going to do it the right way. We're not going to go off and do all kinds of things that are grievous to the Lord. Chapter 13. Do not tolerate false prophets, and do not tolerate people who lure you away to false gods. Essentially, that's the message of chapter 13. Chapter 14, he talks about the clean and unclean foods. We had talks about this previously, but he's rehearsing this for the people. He also talks a little bit about the tithe in chapter 14. Chapter 15, we have rules about debt and lending to the poor, and also the release of the slaves in the 7th year. Also consecration of the firstborn animals. Things that we've seen before, but again, we're seeing them again. Chapter 16 talks about the festivals, specifically 3 festivals: the festival of Passover, the festival of weeks, and the festival of booths. We talked about those festivals at length previously. Chapter 17, miscellaneous laws and statutes. There's just several things going on there that hopefully you read. And if you didn't, you can always go back and do it later. Chapter 18, provision for the Levites, is one of the things that's discussed there. Another thing that's discussed is the true prophetic versus spiritism. Going after the voice of God and not going after the voice of other gods, or going after occult practices, essentially. Chapter 19, let's see, where am I here? Let's catch up with myself. Chapter 19 talks about the cities of refuge. Again, we talked about that just a couple weeks ago. It talks about the rule where if you're going to bring charge against someone, to hear that charge and to have a guilty verdict pronounced, there needs to be at least 2 or 3 witnesses. We're not going to just have some random guy say, well, this guy did such and such. Oh, well, let's kill him. We're going to have, in the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses, to make sure that, as much as possible, justice prevails in courtroom settings. Quote-unquote courtroom. Chapter 20 talks about rules for war. There is a just way to do war according to the Lord, according to the Old Testament. And so there's some of that stuff in there. Chapter 21 deals with various versions of civil rights, unsolved murders, captured women, and the firstborn. It also talks a little bit about the rebellion of, in particular, sons, when you have a rebellious son. Again, pretty much all of these things we've seen previously in the other, either Exodus or Leviticus, and that's why it's called the second law. It's not different, usually, mostly, it's just a rearticulation. Chapters 22 and 23, again, just more miscellaneous laws there. And then chapter 24 is where we have a discussion of marriage and divorce, a short discussion. It's not comprehensive, but there's a little piece there. There's also some laws about finances and how to protect people and empower people so that people aren't taking advantage of people financially. Chapter 25 talks about family legacy, fairness, and mercy. And chapter 26 talks about the tithe again and the first fruits. Now, I want to read, in this one I did copy paste, so I don't need my Bible to do it. I just want to read the very end of our piece that we did today, chapters 5 through 26. At the very end of chapter 26, Moses says this, beginning verse 16. This day the Lord your God commands you to observe these statutes and judgments, all these things that he just preached in this 2-hour sermon or more, okay, from chapter 5 through 26. You imagine coming to church on Sunday and the sermon is reading chapter 5 through 26, okay? All right. So anyway, this day the Lord your God commands you to observe these statutes and judgments. Therefore you shall be careful to observe them with all your heart and with all your soul. Today you have proclaimed the Lord to be your God. We talked about in last week that one of the things that's going on here in Deuteronomy is the Israelites, the second generation of Israelites, is ratifying the covenant. They are saying, yes, we agree to the Lord, to what he says. And for a time, they are blessed in this moving forward. And so today you have proclaimed the Lord to be your God, and that you will walk in his ways and keep his statutes, his commandments, and his judgments, and that you will obey his voice. Verse 18, also today the Lord has proclaimed you to be his special people, just as he promised you that you should keep all his commandments, and that he will set you high above all nations which he has made, in praise, in name, and in honor, and that you may be a holy people to the Lord your God, just as he has spoken. So after we get this articulation, he says to the people, this day, you're agreeing to this, and he's saying that you're his special people. Let's go, okay? So that's Moses' second sermon in a nutshell. And so we'll move on to our exercise to hopefully get a little bit of additional understanding and knowledge. 1 per 2 people is good. If I have enough to come back, I will. But 1 per 2 people is great. So this sheet has several quotes from Deuteronomy. And your job is to write in the blank who in the New Testament quoted or alluded to. You guys can work together if you want. Great. We talked about how Deuteronomy has lots of quotations and allusions in the New Testament, and so you can do one by yourself if you want, Sherry, or you. Okay, that's fine. You can. So if you know who said it, put the name down of who said it, and if you know the reference, like Matthew chapter 1 verse 1 or whatever, put that down as well. Obviously, I don't expect you necessarily to know all these off the top of your head, but so do some searching, do some keyword searching, some Googling or some Bible app or whatever, and see what we can come up with. I do have extras if anybody wants more. How we doing? 3 minutes? All right, how about it? Close enough? No? All right, 60 seconds. Sorry. I had 10 and then I had to add 2 more. What's up? About what? No. There's different AIs, but yeah, give it the parameters and it spits it out. It'll write you a worship song too. Better than most. All right, Deuteronomy 6. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. Jesus said it. Anybody else say it? Maybe. Jesus definitely said it in what reference? Mark chapter 12, verses 29 and 30. That's right. It comes back in other gospels as well. Okay, the next three, number 2, 3, and 4, go together as a unit, don't they? Did you see that? Okay, what are they? Jesus said them. Yeah, there's only 2 answers, right? It's either Jesus or Paul. Yeah, right. Yeah, so, yes, the next 3 are Jesus, but it's not just Jesus. It's Jesus in a specific setting, which is what? The temptation in the wilderness. Okay, so all 3 of his responses to Satan in the wilderness temptation came from the book of Deuteronomy. They are actually out of order in order of Deuteronomy, right? The first one was number 3, right? Man shall not live by bread alone. That's Matthew 4:4. Then number 2, you shall not put the Lord your God to the test. That was his second response, Matthew 4:7. And then Deuteronomy 10:20, you shall fear the Lord your God, you shall serve him. That was the last statement that he made to the devil, Matthew 4:10. All right. Okay. Deuteronomy number 5, 17:7, you shall put away the evil from among you. Paul said it. Where did he say it? 1 Corinthians 5:13. He's talking about that fella in the Corinthian church that was up to really no good. And he said, get this guy out of the church. There's no place for this. And the word there literally is purge. In Deuteronomy, you are either killing that person, stoning them, or removing them from from the camp. But purge that out of your people. And so Paul is saying that to the New Testament church about this fella in 1 Corinthians 5. Okay, Deuteronomy 21:23, number 6, anyone hung on a tree is under God's curse. That's Paul, and it's where? Galatians 3:13. Okay, Deuteronomy 24:1, a man takes a wife and marries her, etc., etc. Jesus, the what? Yes, that's right. They used this. Jesus says to them, those who were questioning him, what does the law say? And it says this, and this is the reference, Deuteronomy 24:1. Matthew 5:31 is quoted. And what is Jesus' response to this? It's in a section of the Sermon on the Mount where he is articulating over and over and over how his standard is actually higher than the Old Testament standard. Today, people look at Jesus and they say, well, the Old Testament, there's this high bar, you can't attain it, so much crazy stuff, and Jesus is all love and grace and mercy, and so the standard is lower. Not at all. Jesus makes it clear in the Sermon on the Mount, chapter 5, Matthew, that his standard is higher. Now, the good news is he helps us to meet it. You know, he meets the standard of the law in us when we walk according to the Spirit, not according to the flesh. But his standard is higher. And when it comes to divorce, what they were doing at that time was the men of that time had really degraded this law from Deuteronomy to take it to be pretty much anything they wanted it to be. So my wife burned the beans. Here's your certificate of divorce. No. Jesus is saying, no, that doesn't fly. His standard is higher. Okay, Deuteronomy 25:4. You shall not muzzle an ox. There's actually two of these. I didn't remember that when I put it down there, but did you find both references? 1 Corinthians 9:9 and 1 Timothy 5:18, both in reference to what? Paul takes this passage and applies it to paying your clergy. Pastor Jeff, pay that guy. He's doing a great job, you know? Well, and you are. But my point is, Paul is saying it is right and proper to pay the people, to give them food and drink and room and board and all of the above for bringing you the message of the Lord. Okay, that's an interesting appropriation of a random, I shouldn't say random, an obscure law there in Deuteronomy. Okay, number 9, Deuteronomy 27:26, cursed is the one who does not confirm all the words of this law by observing them. Yeah, all the rest of the answers are Paul. Okay, what is the reference there if you found it? Galatians 3:10. Okay, Deuteronomy 29:4, the Lord has not given you a heart to perceive and eyes to hear and ears to hear. It's Paul from Romans 11:8. Actually, all three of the rest of these are Romans. Next one, Deuteronomy 36, the Lord your God will circumcise your heart. Romans 2:29, yes sir. Deuteronomy 30:14, every word is near you in your mouth and in your heart. Romans 10:8, very good. All right, so the point here is there's a lot in Deuteronomy that gets brought into the New Testament, and so it really is very important. And so just helping you to see that and just kind of refreshing your memory on, I'm sure most of these were familiar to you at least, if you weren't able to say who and where and all that, but I would imagine most of them were, at least you've heard them before. Okay, let's go on to second look segment. And second look segment, I want to deal with a theological concept. We've dealt with it before, even in Elba, but it's so important. And we have a passage that brings it to our attention here, and I took the bait. Okay, the passage is Deuteronomy chapter 21, verses 22 and 23. The theological concept is what we call substitution. Substitution. It's him and not me. In other words, it was Jesus instead of you. substitution. And there's substitution makes its way all through the New Testament, particularly the writings of Paul. But this particular reference that Paul makes, that we just saw on the exercise, refers us back to Deuteronomy 21, verses 22 and 23. And here's what it says. If anyone is found guilty of an offense, deserving the death penalty, and is executed, and you hang his body on a tree, you are not to leave his corpse on the tree overnight, but are to bury him that day. For anyone hung on a tree is under God's curse. You must not defile the land the Lord your God is giving you as an inheritance. Now we look at that, if we didn't know Christian theology, we would look at that as a very obscure law from Judaism, right? And you might even look at that and say, why? Why do we have that law? Well, we know that death causes uncleanness. So like if you touch that dead body, you're unclean, right? But it has to do with, here in the last verse, not defiling the land. Basically, that person was deserving of death. That's why they were executed, stoned probably, okay? But then after stoning that person who was deserving of death, now you're going to hang them on a tree. It's like an extra level of humiliation. And this is what they would do. And God is saying, okay, you can do that, but don't leave him up more than 24 hours. You get that guy down and bury him, basically before nightfall, because anyone hung on a tree is under God's curse. You're extending the curse to that guy, to the land, to all the people, if you don't have a timely disposal of this guy's body. Okay, now, again, weird, random, obscure law in Judaism all of a sudden becomes a critical piece of Christian theology. Because who hangs on a tree? Of course, Jesus. And in so doing, he fulfills this law. Anyone hung on a tree is under God's curse. Jesus, hung on a tree, therefore he was under a curse. So let's look now at Galatians 3. You just saw it in the exercise, but there are two verses from Deuteronomy right here in this one paragraph. One from the one we saw that's in verse 10, cursed is everyone who does not continue in all things which are written in the book of the law. But then also this one we just read, cursed is everyone who hangs on a tree. So let's read the passage first. This is Galatians chapter 3, beginning at verse 10. For as many as are of the works of the law are under the curse. Let's stop right there. New King James. Could have done New Living and I wouldn't have to stop to explain this. Okay. As many as are of the works of the law. In other words, if you're still following the law of Moses, you're under a curse. For it is written, cursed, and here's the Deuteronomy, cursed is everyone who does not continue in all things which are written in the book of the law to do them. And there's no way that you can actually keep the law for yourself. But, verse 11, that no one is justified by the law in the sight of God is evident. No one is justified by working the works of the law, justified in the sight of God. This is evident. Why? Because Habakkuk said, it's on the screen, the just, the people who are made righteous by faith, not by works, not by the works of the law. Habakkuk, by the way, was Old Testament. Verse 12, yet the law is not of faith, but the man who does them shall live by them. This is Leviticus, quote, okay? If you're going to do the law, you got to do the whole law. You got to live out the entire law, and nobody can actually do that. So, good luck with that. Verse 13, Christ has redeemed us from the curse of the law, having become a curse for us. For it is written, cursed is everyone who hangs on a tree, that the blessing of Abraham might come upon the Gentiles in Christ Jesus, that we might receive the promise of the Spirit through faith. Okay, Christ has redeemed us from the curse of the law. The word redeem meaning to buy back with a ransom payment, that is his own death himself. God used the payment of the death of his son to buy us out from under the curse of the law. How did he do this? Substitution. Having become a curse for us. He became a curse for us, for it is written, cursed is everyone who hangs on a tree. Now this particular passage is dealing with the law and the curse from the law. We know also that we are free from sin, also by substitution. Okay? There's several little pieces here of what is being substituted. He substitutes for us. It was him and not us. The most obvious is the punishment. He took the punishment. We see that. And now we don't have to, right? We don't have to go to a cross because he did. He also is taking the curse of the law, and we don't have to. We no longer are under the law, and we are no longer under the curse that comes with the law. But there's a third thing that he takes from us substitution-wise in substitutionary fashion, and that is the power of sin. 2 Corinthians 5:21 says it this way. For he made him, he God made him Jesus, who knew no sin, totally sin-free. He knew no sin. He made him, God made Jesus, who knew no sin, to be sin for us, that we might become the righteousness of God in him. We are sinners. He is sinless and completely, totally righteous. God made him, Jesus, to be sin so that we could be made righteous. It's a flip-flop. It is substitution. It's him and not us. And so in this passage, let me go back to the passage from Deuteronomy chapter 21 that says, everyone hung on a tree is under God's curse. In this passage, the law itself, the law of Moses, Deuteronomy, in this passage, the law prophetically foreshadows the event that would render it impotent. The law itself is foreshadowing prophetically the event that is making the law itself rendered powerless. Pretty cool. As Pastor Jeff would say, Chessmaster 9000 or something. Okay. God is thinking so many steps ahead, and we see this random little law, this obscure little law that we would say, why is that even there? And we find out later on, it's actually a very important reason why that's there, and it points to our salvation by substitution, substitutionary atonement. All right. Personal practical application. Let's go back to the Shema. Somebody remind me what the Shema is. Hear is what the word means, okay? So Deuteronomy chapter 6, Hear, O Israel, Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. And keep these things in front of yourself and in front of your children all the time, so you don't forget. Okay. Very important aspect of Jewish culture and religion. Huge, huge. You know, when we look at the, I'm going to keep teaching here for a second. When we look at the Ten Commandments, and we say, okay, those are the Ten Commandments. That's the big dogs right there. And then the fella comes along and he says, okay, what's the greatest commandment? And he says, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. And the fella says, that's a good answer. Okay. And the second is like it, love your neighbor as yourself. All the law and the prophets can funnel back to this one thing, 1A and 1B. Love the Lord and love your neighbor. Okay. And the guy says, that's good. You did. That was good. You answered that question pretty well. Okay. What's the greatest commandment? We look at the 10 Commandments. The 10 Commandments, and that's not one of them. So we look at that and we say, we Christians, we would say, well, that's interesting, isn't it? That Jesus picked this commandment that's outside of the 10 Commandments. You would say, what's the greatest commandment? You would expect that he would pick one of the top 10, right? But as Christians, I don't think we understand the supreme value that the Jewish mind places on the Shema. That would not have been a random thought that Jesus pulled out. Okay? It wouldn't have been like that they would have said, oh, well, that's so weird that you didn't pick one of the top 10. No, because they knew that, again, Deuteronomy, second law, Moses is saying, here's what to remember. They would have definitely thought in terms of the Shema being hugely important. So it's really not surprising that Jesus would have said, this is the greatest commandment. It's surprising to us because it's not on the top 10 list. But to them, this was a great commandment. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. So that part is I think that's worth understanding. Okay, so the application here is with the Shema. Does it apply to us today? Now, do we need to memorize Deuteronomy? Probably not. But you see where I'm going here with this application. Is the Shema applicable to us today? Discuss the importance of recalling the unique transcendence and significance of God's existence. Unique transcendence and significance. In other words, hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. It's him and him only above all other gods. Unique. There's none like him. He's the one. Jot down, so after you're going to discuss the importance of keeping that in front of our face, and then jot down a concrete plan for increasing the quality and quantity of such recollections. When you sit, when you travel, when you lie down, when you get up. How can we keep this in front of us in a very practical, write it down kind of a way?